Pelosi, not mincing words. They said effectively they are no longer cooperating with the inquiry, calling it baseless, dangerous, illegitimate, and unconstitutional. Here's what some of that letter had to say. The president's lawyers writing, because participating in this inquiry under the current unconstitutional posture would inflict lasting institutional harm on the executive branch and lasting damage to the separation of powers. You have left the president no choice but not to cooperate. Let's bring on our White House reporter, Jordan Phelps. Catherine Faulders is our investigative reporter up on Capitol Hill. She joins us as well. Jordan, going to start with you. Help us understand these objections being put forward by the White House. Are they legitimate? How should we make any sense of this?
Well, Devin, of course, House Democrats say they are not legitimate. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi quickly fired back to this letter, saying that the White House is manifestly wrong and saying this is only the latest attempt by the White House to cover up his betrayal of our democracy. Now, Devin, from the White House's perspective, part of this is political, but part of this is based on law and precedent. If you talk to White House officials, what they'll tell you is in the two previous recent impeachments under Nixon and Clinton, there were some basic due processes built in to the process that they say are just lacking here, and that until those are built in, they're not going to cooperate. So one thing they'd like to see is they'd like to see a full House floor vote to formalize this inquiry rather than what they say has just been a press conference by Nancy Pelosi. I also talked to a White House official who was poring over rules that a committee under Clinton actually agreed to before undergoing the impeachment process. And that gave the White House a right to have counsel present and to cross-examine witnesses. Right now, they say those things don't exist for them, and so therefore it's unfair.
Yeah, Democrats moving so fast, they've bypassed some of those measures that were agreed to back during the Clinton impeachment. Like you said, Jordan, they're not technically required on the part of the Democrats, but certainly a lot of people now starting to raise questions about why Nancy Pelosi perhaps isn't pursuing these things. Catherine, this puts the Democrats in a little bit of a tough spot because the public is warming to the inquiry we see in these polls. But now, as people are sort of starting to look to get more facts, absent some sort of agreement from the White House, we're sort of at a stalemate.
Yeah, so Democrats very clearly don't want to lose momentum here. You saw Chairman Schiff come out and say that this actually wasn't, that the stonewalling wasn't going to slow down their investigation. So they'll issue more subpoenas with, of course, the knowledge that they're not going to get any information from the administration or from the State Department or any of these agencies that they want information from, Devin. So I think that they're still on track to do this quickly. As you mentioned, public support is up for this. But in the articles of impeachment, it's very likely that there will be one on obstruction. The committee has said in their letters that their subpoena letters that if they don't turn over documents or don't cooperate, then that will constitute as obstructing their House impeachment probe.
And Jordan, real quickly, the White House does seem to be considering the fact that perhaps drawing this out, perhaps going to court over things like subpoenas for documents and testimony could work in their favor because the public might see that as a fair claim in this fight.
Stalling tactic, if you want to look at it that way. But the White House right now is very much sticking to this strategy of fighting this out until they're satisfied that it's a fair process. Of course, this is a White House that never shies away from a fight. So this is really what you might expect from the Trump White House.
Perhaps the White House, though, also turning up the volume, the White House and the Trump campaign turning up the volume of their attacks on Joe Biden in all of this, stoking this case of conspiracy theories, raising questions without presenting evidence about Joe Biden's conduct in the Ukraine. And now, just moments ago, the former vice president went further than he ever has before so far in talking about impeachment. Take a listen.
With his words and his actions, President Trump has indicted himself by obstructing justice, refusing to comply with the congressional inquiry. He's already convicted himself. Donald Trump has violated his oath of office, betrayed this nation, and committed impeachable acts. You know, to preserve our Constitution, our democracy, our basic integrity, he should be impeached.
This is a big deal, Jordan. Joe Biden had been one of the more reluctant Democratic candidates to call outright for the president's impeachment, didn't want to alienate some centrist voters. So a big deal for him to come forward and say that outright, right?
Absolutely a big deal, Devin, especially since he is kind of one of the leading candidates in this race. It kind of brings this forward even more. He is a little late to the game here on this, though, Devin. And the president, of course, must have been watching Joe Biden's speech there, because he was quick to take to Twitter, calling it pathetic and saying, Joe Biden calling for my impeachment when I did nothing wrong. Joe's failing campaign gave him no other choice. So the president there might be calling it pathetic, but Devin, Joe Biden certainly succeeded in getting the president's attention.
And Catherine, part of this, and I know you have covered some of these candidates out on the campaign trail as well. Joe Biden has taken some heat for not more aggressively pushing back against President Trump. He talks about his ability to beat the president like a drum, but some of his critics have said he's been a little slow out of the gate. A change of course today, right? We saw him actually tweet back in real time at the president.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Jordan really hit on it there, where critics have said that he has been slow to respond, that he hasn't responded appropriately or well, really, to this Ukraine matter. But yeah, you did see him change his tune. He really essentially replied in real time to the president, Devin. And I just think another thing to point out from what Biden said is he's using the president's own words against him now. The president had that infamous comment where he said, I could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue and nobody would care. Well, Biden also said that the president is essentially shooting holes in the Constitution, Devin.
Yeah, this is a quickly escalating fight between Trump and Biden on this question of impeachment. A lot of fast-moving developments. Thank you both very much. Jordan Phelps for us at the White House, and Catherine Faulders up on Capitol Hill. Speaking of President Trump and Joe Biden, Trump is not Biden's only target today. His campaign is also taking on Facebook over their commitment to running a Trump campaign ad that includes wildly misleading and at times false claims. This dispute, along with Elizabeth Warren's attack on Facebook, has now mushroomed out on the campaign trail and put Facebook in somewhat of an uncomfortable position as we head into a deeper into the political season. Our Rachel Scott, our White House correspondent, is here. Sasha Pesnick covers the Warren campaign. She's out on the trail. We're also joined by Jeremy Kaplan, a tech reporter, joins us from New York. Guys, great to have you. Fascinating number of developments today between these Democratic candidates and Facebook, really going to town on Mark Zuckerberg. And I want to start with this campaign ad and what's in it. Let's just start by showing our viewers what has become so controversial and what's a flashpoint here. Rachel, take a look here. ABC News isn't going to show the ad because it is misleading. CNN has actually declined to run this ad on its airwaves. But here's one of its central claims. The claim in the Trump campaign ad says Joe Biden promised Ukraine $1 billion if they fired the prosecutor investigating his son's company. And Rachel, that is a highly misleading claim.
Exactly. And this is exactly what the ads do. They push these exaggerations. They push these unfounded claims, because for the Trump campaign, this is about controlling the narrative. And we saw this with the Mueller investigation. They're using the same terms, witch hunt, things that appeal to their voters. They want to cause this division between Democrats and Republicans. And for them, this is about Democrats not accepting the results of the 2016 election. And they're trying to drill that home to their base, even if it means, moving forward with these exaggerations and unfounded claims.
You know, a lot of pressure on groups like Facebook to put something like that into the bloodstream just to take on that claim. If we can put up again, Joe Biden promised Ukraine $1 billion. He actually didn't. The United States Congress had pledged $1 billion in grant guarantees to the Ukraine back during the Obama administration. And the United States, Joe Biden was the point person for Ukraine policy, along with dozens of other countries around the world, threatened to withhold that money if Ukraine and the prosecutor in that country didn't root out corruption. that prosecutor was taking a look at Joe Biden's, a company that Joe Biden's son was involved with. It wasn't his son's company, right, Rachel? This was a company called Burisma. It was an oil and gas company, and Hunter Biden was on the board.
Right, exactly. And but for the Trump campaign, they're trying to muddy these waters a little bit more. And I think what they are fighting against here is that the whistleblower complaint was deemed credible and of urgent concern by the Inspector General, and they're having to battle the facts of someone deeming these concerns legitimate. And not only that, but actually the fact that this is easier to understand, I think, for a lot of voters than the Mueller investigation. I always say TDLR, too long, didn't read. It was a 400-some-odd page document. Voters couldn't really wrap their heads around what was going on. This is very simple for voters. This is the President of the United States repeatedly urging a foreign leader to investigate a potential 2020 rival. So this raises their concern of like, well, this is why the President is doing it. They're trying to change the
They're muddying the
argument here.
waters for sure. Let's put up one other claim that's in the ad. This one's outright false. Again, just to give you a flavor of why Facebook is facing so much pressure right now, because this Trump campaign ad that is disputed pushes these false claims. This one, in the ad, it says, when Trump asks Ukraine to investigate corruption, the Democrats want to impeach him. That's simply false, as proven by the transcript that the president himself put out. He didn't ask Ukraine to investigate corruption. He asked a favor for them to look into his political rival, Joe Biden, and that is now under investigation. So there's a little bit of misleading there. Let's take a look at how the Biden campaign is responding to this and the Facebook's willingness to disseminate this ad across its social media platform. Campaign manager Greg Schultz wrote to Facebook in the past day or so. It said, recently Facebook pledged to reject political advertising. Previously, they included previously debunked content, including links, videos, photos, demote posts or paid placements containing such content, and delay related information from fact checkers that provides your users with an accurate picture of the facts. That pledge is implicated by this ad, and we expect Facebook to follow it. Jeremy, you've covered Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg is sort of staying hands off here.
Yeah, Facebook is in a real bind on this one. And it all comes down to the concept of fake news, something we've covered extensively at Digital Trends, of course. What exactly is fake news and fake information, misinformation? So in this case, Facebook has a very clear policy about fake ads, those that contain demonstrably false information or information proven wrong by third-party fact checkers is banned. Now here in this case, the information from the president's own ad is actually fake. It has been proven that by third parties. Facebook draws a very fine line here and says information that comes directly from the president himself falls under a different set of rules and regulations. It's a very fine line that they're drawing, but it's a very good point. If you think about the news that comes out on a daily basis from ABC, from other major news sources, oftentimes it quotes directly information that the president says, even if it feels like it's false information or misleading information. It comes from the president. It is itself newsworthy. It's a very fine line that they're walking here. You might argue they're splitting hairs. I actually favor what Facebook's doing here. I think they're making the right call, even though it's a difficult one, and it does involve distributing and sharing information that is false.
Great analysis and well said, Jeremy. Thanks for that. I want to actually put up for our viewers what Facebook has gone on the record saying in response to the Biden campaign's formal objections to Facebook running this false ad. Here's what they said just earlier this week. They said, our approach is grounded in Facebook's fundamental belief in free expression, respect for the democratic process, among other things. Of course, Sasha, let's bring you into this because it's not just Joe Biden complaining about Facebook here, but Elizabeth Warren has been hammering Facebook. In fact, just this tweet earlier today said Facebook already helped elect Donald Trump by pushing fake ads because they were asleep at the wheel while Russia attacked our democracy and put these sorts of false statements into the social media bloodstream.
Yeah, that's right, Devin. She's been taking the fight to Facebook's front digital doorstep for a long time now. She and Zuckerberg have been sparring it out for weeks here. And this latest attack from her comes after, Facebook has had a lot of issues with their misinformation distribution on their site. But she's also walking a fine line herself because she's come after Biden very subtly as well, saying that she herself would not have one of her children on a foreign board like Biden has come under scrutiny for.
And Jeremy, going back to you, you know, Facebook has pushed back now on this objection raised by the Biden campaign, which you called a close call, splitting hairs. You're kind of on their side here. Elizabeth Warren raising her voice in that complaint, but she's also threatening to do something that Joe Biden isn't. And that's break up Facebook if she takes power and goes into the White House. How concerned do you think Mark Zuckerberg should be about that? What do you think Facebook is preparing to do in the event she's elected?
I think Facebook should be terrified of that. There's a very real possibility that Elizabeth will act on that if she gets elected, and she has every reason to. There are a lot of reasons and justifications for breaking up Facebook. It's actually something I've personally argued for on Digital Trends as well. That said, this issue about fake news is it's a very challenging, thorny one. Facebook has in fact shared information that has caused problems in the past, and they've made steps to try to prevent that from happening going forwards. In this case, because the information comes straight from the president, it's arguably not the same type of fake news. Again, it's a really fine line there. It's not a campaign from a foreign operative. It's not the spread of false information that has been created by a news organization. It comes directly from the president himself. So as such, I feel like they probably do have to get that information out there and then leave it up to places like ABC to refute that and say, well, here's the actual truth of this.
Well, it is a reminder of the importance for fact checkers out there everywhere. Jeremy Kaplan with Digital Trends, thank you so much. Really astute analysis there. And Rachel, back to you, because we were saying at the beginning here, this is all about muddying the waters, creating a lot of smoke, raising questions. It seems very similar to me to the president's strategy towards Barack Obama and raising these birtherism questions. There isn't any evidence to suggest Joe Biden did anything wrong in Ukraine, but just the mere raising of questions causes so much confusion for voters.
And you're hitting the nail on the head here, because I travel the country, I talk to Trump voters at these rallies, and that is exactly it. When that question gets raised in their head, then they're able to push back. They have doubt that these claims can maybe have a little bit of weight. If the president of the United States is saying it, if his campaign is saying it, well, maybe there is something that is true here, and they challenge it. And you see it when you talk to voters out on the trail. They often raise some of those unfounded claims, misleading exaggerations. And Devin, I just want to point to, just moments ago, the Trump campaign announced that they're not stopping with these ads. They're going to move them forward. They announced new ads that they're going to continue to push, all part of this $10 million advertising blitz that the RNC and the Trump campaign are now pushing ahead on. And these continue in key early voting states here. So they're trying to hit Biden head on in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, where it's going to matter.
They're flooding those early state markets with these false and misleading ads, and why his Joe Biden's allies are calling on him to be more aggressive in countering them. Real quickly, before we move on, back to Sasha Pesnick. She's covering the Warren campaign, because there is a little bit of news on a different topic, Sasha, that I want to hit before we go, and that is that Elizabeth Warren has just today announced that she is now expanding her pledge to not take any major dollar donations from fundraisers if she wins the nomination. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. So originally she had pledged that she wasn't going to take any big dollar fundraising money from any big super PACs or big donors in the primary. Now she's expanding that forward to the general election should she win the nomination. And it's really great. It's what she's built her brand on during this campaign. But at the same time, it's making some in the DNC kind of nervous, because they themselves are pretty heavily in debt, $7.3 million in late August, Evan.
And she is going to be, if she gets a nomination, facing a big money machine in the Trump campaign and the RNC. Yeah, you've been reporting on that, exactly. Rachel Scott. Sasha Pesnick, thank you so much. Rachel Scott, thank you. No, you're headed to Minnesota to cover President Trump's rally tomorrow in my hometown of Minneapolis, so we'll see you out there. Thank you so much. All right. Moving on now to those rapidly unfolding developments along the Syria-Turkey border. This is a region of the world that you need to pay attention to, because it's considered the front lines in the fight against ISIS. U.S. troops, just until this week, had been in this region helping that fight until President Trump abruptly made the decision to pull them out. Now Turkey is filling that void, vowing to invade that area, and as one U.S. military official put it, bringing the fight to ISIS to a halt in light of this. So how concerning is this? What does it mean for those thousands of ISIS fighters that are being held in prisons? Our Ian Panel is in Turkey covering this story, and a short time ago filed this report.
Hi there, Devon. I think it's fair to say that this is a region now bracing for war. The Kurds certainly ready for an imminent attack. Remember, the Kurds are a key American ally, and that attack's going to come from Turkey, which of course is another key American ally, a member of NATO. However, for President Erdogan, this is a matter of national security. He wants to control the border area inside northern Syria and push back Kurdish fighters, which he regards as terrorists. For the Kurds, however, this is a matter of saving not just the lives of civilians on the ground, but protecting their homeland. This, of course, came about after President Trump had a phone conversation with President Erdogan, and shortly after that, American troops were pulled away from key border areas. Those troops had effectively been acting as a buffer zone, preventing the Kurds and the Turks from attacking each other. They left almost immediately, and now there seems nothing likely to be able to stop that. Remember that this is an area where most of the fighting against ISIS has taken place inside Syria. The Kurds have been key allies on the ground, the ones who do most of the fighting and most of the dying, and work together with American forces against ISIS to liberate large swathes of territory. But they also, at the moment, guard thousands and thousands of ISIS prisoners, including many foreign fighters. And the Kurds have said that if Turkey moves across the border, then they will pull their troops back from the areas around the prisons, from the areas that have been recently liberated from ISIS, and push them up to face against Turkish troops. So what happens to those ISIS prisoners? And already in the last 24 hours, we've seen reports of ISIS attacks in Raqqa, which used to be the capital of their caliphate. This is also in northern Syria. Again, an indication that ISIS will try and make hay while the sun shines for them by the Kurdish forces pulling out of that area. Many people are deeply concerned about further instability across the Middle East at a time when people are only just starting to recover from war. But above all else, this is about the civilians on the ground, the men, the women and the children who suffered years and years of conflict and are now staring down the barrel of yet another war. Devin?
Thanks to Ian Panel for laying out the stakes in this conflict and why that region is so important. I want to bring in now our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, who has been covering the U.S. military's involvement up there and what is going on with President Trump's decision. We're also joined by Yusuf Aram from Istanbul. He's with Turkish radio and television, an analyst there, going to help us understand how the Turks are viewing all this. Louis, going to start with you because this comment from a U.S. official about the fight against ISIS effectively being halted because of the president's decision this week is a stunning headline. What does that mean?
Well, a little context here, Devin. What we're talking about is that the Syrian Democratic Forces, that's the predominantly Kurdish force, they are the ones that have stopped their counter-ISIS operations, not the coalition, not the U.S. They're continuing on with their mission inside of Syria. That's what they're there for, and that's what they're continuing to do. But the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish forces, they are saying that they have stopped their operations because of the Turkish incursion. And it kind of makes sense, right? They're the ones that are spread out over that map that you saw there, that northeastern Syria area. And so they're going to gather all of their forces to repel this Turkish incursion. So it kind of does make sense, but an important clarifier, it doesn't mean that all this includes the U.S. forces or the coalition. This is only applying to the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Just means in that area, our allies have got bigger fish to fry right now, so to speak. Let's bring in Yusuf Aram from the Turkish radio and television network to give us his perspective. Yusuf, thank you so much for being here. A lot of Americans wondering perhaps why Turkey and President Erdogan have been so determined to go into this region and why they have been pressing President Trump to get those U.S. troops out of the way. Help us understand that. Why is this such an important strategic area for the Turks?
Well, for Turkey, it's a national security issue now. The people that the U.S. are calling the Kurds, they're actually a group called the People's Protection Unit, a Kurdish paramilitary group that has direct links to another group called the PKK. The Turks view this as a terrorist group, and it's also a U.S. designated terrorist group. So to simplify this group and call it the Kurds is not a correct label. They're definitely not the Kurds. There's over 30 million Kurds in the Middle East, scattered through 4 different countries: Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey. 12 million just living in Turkey alone. So it's a major national security issue, and this is something that has been brought up since 2014 when President Erdogan told Obama not to partner up with this group, but Obama went ahead, and in the end, the inevitable happened. This is a group that is completely unacceptable for Turkey to operate right along its borders, as its Turkish affiliate has launched a war against Turkey for 40 years inside Turkey, leading to the death of over 40,000 people. We have to realize that the PKK has killed more Turks than Al-Qaeda has killed people, period. And this is a direct national security threat to Turkey. Now, as for the fight in ISIS, as my colleague
let me ask you about the ISIS fight, and you are very right to point out that this is not a black and white situation there. This is a complicated dynamic with different groups of people with different allegiances and obviously complicated players. On the question of ISIS, has Turkey assured President Trump that they will take care of those prisons housing all of those ISIS detainees? What can you tell us on that side of the story?
Now, Turkey has been fighting ISIS since 2016. They launched Operation Euphrates Shield into the Jarablus, Al-Bab, and Azaz area, ISIS strongholds. Turkey actually neutralized, or less politically correct, killed 3,000 ISIS fighters itself. So ISIS is not an organization that Turkey likes at all. They're actually targets of Turkey anywhere Turkey can find them. And within this operation, they're going to target ISIS as well. And yes, President Erdogan has given President Trump assurances that Turkey will take over the responsibilities to fight any type of ISIS elements in that region and preventing ISIS revival.
Because I'm almost out of time, I'm just going to cut you off, Yusuf, and bring Louis back in for a final thought, Louis, because as we're talking about how complicated this is, the PKK is very different from the